I have always enjoyed being upside down. I don't necessarily love the feeling of blood rushing to my head or the dizziness that follows, but rather seeing the world from a different perspective. Oftentimes, I'll walk around my house on my hands or lay with my feet up and my head hanging off the side of the couch, just amazed at how different things appear when you look at them from a different place. I believe this love stemmed from beginning a new sport at a very young age called gymnastics. When I was 2 years old, my mom signed me up for my very first class, which was Mommy and Me. This class was basically just a time where kids could run, jump, play, and of course be upside down. And it was also a great way to have someone else deal with your 2-year-old for about an hour. For anyone who knows my mom, Robin, knows that she saw this as a win-win. Gymnastics soon became my first love. I loved the rush of adrenaline I felt when I leapt across the beam or did a swan dive into the foam pit. As I started to get older, my love for gymnastics grew more and more. I was signed up for different classes, each one more challenging and more demanding than the previous. I was hooked. My drawers quickly filled with leotards and scrunchies, and I was almost always covered in chalk. At the age of 6, I had grown out of instructional classes and was encouraged to try out for a team. Long story short, I made it and soon began competing at the junior Olympic level with girls twice my age and twice my height. My days were quite different from those of an average kindergarten student. I woke up, went to school, did my homework on the bus ride home, changed into my leotard at the gym, practiced for 4 hours, came home, ate some Easy Mac, went to bed, and did it all over again the next day. At the age of 7, I was selected to be a hopeful. In the gymnastics world, a hopeful was a young girl or boy that trainers and coaches thought had strong potential to be candidates for the Olympic and national teams. I was then entered into a program called TOPS, a rigorous pre-Olympic training program that would set us on path for the first Olympics we were eligible for. This program was a big deal. It was scary and it was hard, but I was not alone. My 3 best friends, Kylie, Danielle, and Sabrina, were also selected for the program, and we began our journey together. We had Olympic dreams and felt as if our entire life story was set in stone. I was in my element in practice, on top of the world even. But fast forward 11 years later, and life could not be more different from what I had ever imagined. By the time I was 11, I was a state champion, a regional champion on the vault, nationally ranked, and on my way to a college scholarship. I competed with girls that some of you may know, such as Allie Raisman, who competed in the past 2 Summer Olympics, and I was quickly making a name for myself in the industry. At practice, I fit right in. My teammates were my best friends, and my coaches had grown to become additional parental figures. My life outside the gym, however, was not as glamorous. I went to a public elementary school in North Andover, Sergeant School, and since kindergarten, I'd had issues fitting in. My cousin Alex, who is my next-door neighbor and also my best friend, was being picked on at school as well, but he had it worse than me. He was miserable and often told me he contemplated skipping school, being homeschooled, even running away. I did everything that the counselors say to do when you know a friend is being bullied. I stepped in, I told an adult when he was in trouble, and I accompanied him everywhere, just so he wouldn't be alone. I became the subject of the teasing and the taunting eventually, and soon I was the one who wanted to skip school entirely. Gymnastics was my escape from all the drama. I once confided in one of my older coaches, also named Alex, and he told me the following. You know, Kaylee, school isn't that important. Look at me. I did gymnastics my whole life, didn't bother with college, and now I'm thriving. You know what my coach used to tell me? School first, gymnastics second. Obviously, this was not the best advice to give a 5th grader. However, I took 2 things out of Alex's ramble. 1, who needs an education when you can do a backflip? And 2, as long as I had the gym, I'd be okay. I could push school out of my mind and channel all of my frustration into my conditioning, my flexibility, and my tumbling. I pushed myself to be better, to be stronger. One day at practice, I pushed myself too hard and had my first major injury. On my way to practice, sometime around Christmas, I was crying in the back of my mom's car. I'd had an incredibly bad day at school. A girl dumped a Capri Sun on the front of my pants because I told her she could not have my Oreos that I packed for snack that day. When I told the teacher, I was reminded that sharing was caring and was scolded for being a tattletale. I showed up to practice that day distracted and distraught. After we did our conditioning and stretching, we moved to our event rotations, and I made my way to the vault. I lined up first, hit the runway at full speed, and focused all my frustration on hitting the springboard. I placed my hands on the table, and when I tried to pop off, the table collapsed, and I fell knees first onto the mats. A shooting vein began pulsating in my right leg, but I got up, I walked it off, and pretended the pain wasn't there. That was probably the second dumbest thing I could have done. I practiced for 3 more days on that knee. I wore long pants to the gym to hide the bruising and the swelling from my parents, and brushed off any comments my coaches made. In gymnastics, in the words of my favorite coach, you are taught to suck it up and deal with it. So that's what I did. I decided not to show whenever I was in any physical or emotional pain. About a week later was our annual holiday classic, hosted at our home gym, and probably one of the most fun meets of the year. I decided I did not want to miss that meet, and I competed, gimpy leg and all. This was the stupidest thing I could have done. I promised the trainer I would see the doctor after the competition wrapped up, and I earned myself some hardware. I competed, iced in between events, and as promised, following awards and a first-place trophy, my mom rushed me to the hospital for an x-ray on my knee. I was diagnosed with a fractured kneecap and a fractured growth plate, and was out of gymnastics for 2 months. I was put on crutches, placed in a knee brace, and could not put pressure on my leg for at least 2 weeks. This injury interrupted my tops training, and I decided to step down from the Olympic track because I'd be so far behind all the other girls. I was sidelined. I couldn't do my favorite thing in the whole world, and I was devastated. I was somewhat relieved, however, to be injured. I thought that because I was injured, the kids at school would give me a break from all the torment. However, my first day back at school with my injuries, one of the kids took one of my crutches and threw it up in a tree behind the playground. I then had to limp across the playground with one crutch, trying to put the least amount of pressure I could on my leg, while attempting to poke the other crutch out of the tree. Kids surrounded me in a circle in the tree and started calling me a faker because I was standing on 2 feet, and the worst part was, nobody came to help. The recess attendant yelled at me for poking at the tree, and I begged the nurse to let me go home early. Instead, she scolded me for treating my crutches as toys and threatened to take them away from me if I could not use them responsibly. This was the day I realized I might need some help, and that it was probably time for a change in schools. That night, I told my mom what had been happening, how I had been bullied, how I had been asking for help but had been blamed by adults. She became visibly upset and was confused as to why I had not told her sooner. I explained that I felt weak, like a failure, and that most days at school I just wanted to run away. My parents have always held me to a high standard. I told myself I was failing because I had failed to fit in with the rest of my classmates. My mom started to have meetings with teachers and the principal about why they hadn't done anything to help me and let me suffer through the harassment. One of the mothers whose son bullied me said, and I quote, "Maybe if your daughter learned to keep her distance from my son, he would no longer have the urge to bully her." Following the meetings and the conversations, my parents and I made the decision to apply to Pike, a private school in Andover where my cousins Kate and Elizabeth went to school. I was planning to join Pike in the 6th grade in the fall of 2012, and I could not have been more excited. I had my interview, sent in an application, eager to hear back. While waiting, my second home began to crumble before my very eyes. The gym's owner, Dawn, was moving to North Carolina, and a new owner would be taking over the gym. The new coaching staff was inconsistent, undedicated, and some even verbally abusive. The focus shifted from the gymnasts themselves, and earning money became the top priority. And worst of all, my favorite coach had decided to leave. After I learned about my acceptance to Pike, my mom and I discussed what would be happening with gymnastics. I did not want to quit, but I did not want to stay at my current gym. So I decided to follow my coach to a new gym called ACE. The transition to the new gym and the new school was overwhelming at first. ACE was a small gym with girls that had a wide range of talent, and Pike was much different from my old school. I suddenly had lots more homework, a new dress code, a whole new set of people, and a lot less time. I was not the only gymnast at school, however, and teachers and students understood what it was like to have a time commitment as strenuous as gymnastics. My first year at Pike and ACE went better than expected. In gymnastics, despite a broken ankle 3 weeks before states, I still managed to compete, place, and was selected as first alternate for regionals. In school, I'd made new friends and was finally surrounded by adults I could trust. In 7th grade, however, things started to go downhill again. On September 30th, 2013, a Saturday, I was at gymnastics practice. The competition season was right around the corner, and I was working on putting a new skill into my floor routine called a double back. For those of you who do not know what a double back is, here's a video. I'm the one in the red leotard at the back. That day in practice, I had been landing on my feet, but had been over-rotating, so the momentum pushed me backward. After another failed attempt, my coach told me to sit up and look at the wall before my next pass. I pranced eagerly to the end of the rod floor and lined up. I hit the ground running, and when I sat up to go into the double back, I only saw white. I got lost and immediately untucked my body in an attempt to find the ground. My feet hit the ground first, and I was launched forward. At the end of the rod floor was a pile of mats surrounded by foam. After a couple of tumbling passes, the mats tend to shift around, so there was a gap between the floor and what I was landing on. When I landed, my body stayed on the mat, but my face hit the floor, and my neck snapped back and cracked 3 times. I laid face down, unable to move. I have this memory of trying to get up and sitting up, but falling back down. However, my coach has said this never happened. I was flipped over, so I was no longer face down on the mat, and I had tingling in my arms and my fingers, but I could not move my feet or my toes. I was paralyzed for 3 minutes. My coach, Laura, called my mom, and I was rushed to the hospital. Later that night, I was diagnosed with a C7 vertebra fracture, and my parents were relieved to hear that I would most likely make a full recovery and would walk again. I also got to sport this beauty for the next month. Best birthday ever. This injury was the beginning to the end of my gymnastics career. I did compete one more time, however, after months of physical therapy and rest. However, in the weeks following, I decided it was time to hang up my grips for good and put away my leotards. Quitting gymnastics was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do, but ultimately was one of the best decisions I have ever made in my life to this day. Looking back on these injuries now, more than 5 years later, I have come to appreciate what they've done for me. I know this sounds odd. Most people aren't grateful for breaking their neck or having one leg be permanently shorter than the other. But these injuries, in a sense, flipped my world upside down. They caused me to take a step back, made me reevaluate who I was, how I was feeling, and whether or not I was happy. My knee injury made me fall behind in Olympic training and caused me to tell my parents about what was happening at school. Without that injury, I might have never gone to Pike or Brooks or school at all for that matter. My neck injury was the scariest moment of my life till this day. However, had I not broken my neck, I would have never continued to play lacrosse, a sport I will continue to play into college. I would have never picked up field hockey and would have missed out on not only winning the ISL this year, but also the New England Championship. I would have never put on hockey skates and started JV Puck, one of the craziest and most hysterical teams on campus, filled with the most amazing girls that I consider to be like sisters. Gymnastics was my first love and my first heartbreak. It has continued to stay with me throughout these past couple of years. Physically, I have bone deformities and arthritis to prove my years of dedication, but the memories and the people I met along the way will always be what sticks with me most. I still keep in touch with Kylie, Danielle, and Sabrina. Kylie will be attending the University of New Hampshire next year on a D1 scholarship for gymnastics, living her dream. Danielle is the captain of the Masco cheer team and still looks to be as involved with their high school team as she can be. And Sabrina is currently a freshman at UNC on a full swim and dive scholarship. I'm so many more things now than I was at 2 years old. I'm a lacrosse, field hockey, and ice hockey player, a below average singer and dancer, a painter, a little lopsided and always sore, but some part of me will always be a gymnast, and I will always, always just take a moment to be upside down. Thank you.